Okay, we are learning tonight in the Surfside Night Seder from the Otzar Pelaot Hatorah, Parashat Vayehi. It's unbelievable Hidushin from Rab Zickerman. So we are in the Pasuk. It's Perek Mem Zayin, Pasuk Kaftet and Lamed. V'asita imadi Hesed ve'emet. So Yaakov tells Yosef, please, I want you to do for me a charity and a truthfulness. Al natik bereni b'Mitzrayim. Please don't bury me in Egypt. I want to sleep with my forefathers. And please lift me out of Egypt. Again, he mentions Egypt, and please bury me next to them. That's in Me'arat HaMachpelah. So it says here, on the day that a person dies, he knows where he is going. Let's take a look what he says. Rabbeinu Bachya lived about 1,000 years ago. It says Muva devar pele b'shem hamidrash. Something unbelievable is brought down in the midrash. V'zeh leshono. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak mikan sheyodea adam yom mitato lehechan hu holech. The day that a person dies, seemingly when he's still alive, that day he knows where he's going. Im lemakom sadikim, im lemakom reshaim. Whether to the righteous or to the wicked. V'zehu shehigdim v'shachavti ma'avotai. And that's why Yaakov said, I want to sleep with my forefathers. Then afterwards take me out of Egypt. He saw his reward, Yaakov, that he's going to be buried with the righteous. He's going towards the righteous. Devarim Rabbah, Parashat Vayehi ekev ma rab tu becha asher tzafanti derecha. One time Rabbi Avu, this rabbi, was about to die, and he saw his reward that God was going to give him in the future. And all the good that's going to be given to the righteous. He said, all this is for Avu, for me, for Rabbi Avu. Right away he had a desire to die when he saw all the good that was in the next world. That's unbelievable. Let's take a look what he says here on the bottom. God shows the people, especially the Tzaddikim, their reward when they're leaving this world. It's difficult on God to decree death on the righteous. In Tehillim Kuf Tet Zayin Tet Vav, Yakar B'nei Hashem Hamavetan L'Chasidav. Ma HaKadosh Baruch Hu Oseh Mar'eh Lahem Matan Sechlan Kedei Sheyetbiu Mita Befihem. God has a difficulty taking out righteous people from the world. He doesn't want to take them out. They're righteous people. What does he do? He shows them their reward of what is coming. And then they are by themselves want it, and they are moshech, and they say, whoa, all this is for me. Yeah, that's all for your hard work that you did in the Olam Hazeh, that you were with me. Now you get it. Then they say, okay. And then suddenly they themselves are moshech themselves to go, and then they leave partially voluntarily this world. So God,
that is the same day they die.
The same day that they die, because God doesn't want to take them out. They're righteous people. It's talking about the righteous here. Rabbi Avu kishenata lamut. When Rabbi Avu wanted to die, he showed him his reward. He was shocked. He said, all this is for me? Even he couldn't believe it. And that's why it says in Yeshayahu, I said, Ladik Yagati, I worked for naught. Letehu vehevet kochi kiliti aven mishpetet Hashem miyad nit'aveh lemita. And talking about Yeshaya Navi, who said that he was working for naught and nothing, and right away he died, because I guess he was shown that he actually did work for something. Avraham tava mita bepiv, and even Avraham requested death through his own mouth. Ve'ayin b'Yerushalmi Masechet Avodah Zarah Perek Gimel Halacha Aleph ve'odot she'at betirato she'Rabbi Avu haniskar le'ed b'midrash Tanchuma. There's a whole discussion on this Rabbi Avu that requested to die. דאיתא שם שכאשר מת רבי אבוה העבירו לפניו 13 נהרין דאפרסמון. They showed him 13 different rivers of aparsemon. You want to call it like a persimmon fruit. Amar lahem Rabbi Abu kol elu lemi. And they told him, who are all these 13 rivers of these beautiful fruit? Amru lo shelcha. They said, it's all for you. That's your reward. That's all that you're getting. That's what you're getting. Amar lahem v'chol elu shel Abu v'ani amarti l'dik yagati v'gomer. And he said, all this is for me. הקדוש ברוך הוא מראה להם צדיקים מתן צחן בעולם הזה ונפשם שביעה והם ישנים להם. So he says this is how God takes them out of the world. ויש להעיר על דברי המדרש הנ"ל, and let's take a look at what the midrash says. דאיתא במסכת ברכות and דף כוח עמוד ב' כשחלה רבי יוחנן בן זכאי. And when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was one of the rabbis that got the title Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. Rabban, when not the Rabbi. Rabbi would be Resh Bet Yud. The Rabban would be Resh Bet Nun. When you have that extra Nun, it means he was a president. But the Rabban Yohanan was the only rabbi who got that title, but he wasn't the president. And interestingly enough, the Gemara tells us that he was the smallest of all the students of his rabbi, and he ended up becoming the biggest in learning. It's a lesson. It's a lesson that don't underestimate students when you have them. Sometimes you think someone is quiet, he's he's simple, he's not out there, he's not the best in the learning. Hard work and perseverance works. So here, there's a story one time when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai got sick. Before he died, his students came to him to go visit him. When he saw his students, he started crying. They asked him, you are the candle of Israel, you are the right pillar, Patisha Hazak, you are the hammer, the strong one. Why are you crying? You are the leader of Israel. It was you, to you, all the credit of everything of Am Yisrael is to you. How could you be crying now at your deathbed? And he answers them, not only am I crying, he says, I have in front of me two paths, I have heaven and hell in front of me, and I don't know which one they're taking me. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai says, so we see from here, from this story, the Gemara, that clearly Tzaddikim don't know where they're going on the day of death. So how could it be in the previous learning that we just said that he did know? Rabban Yochanan was clearly a big tzaddik. So how could it be? Because we said furthermore that Yaakov Avinu saw that he was going towards the righteous place. So he said, bury me with my forefathers. So why, when Rabban Yochanan died, he did not? Maybe we can say this. That the Midrash is talking about the day of death, specifically the day, that last one. That when the students came to see him, it wasn't the actual day he died, it was before. So he wasn't sure. But the actual day a person dies, he knows exactly where he's going.
But let me ask you, so are we assuming that at that time of that day, whatever, they themselves, that Rabbi did not know he was a tzaddik?
So, not that he didn't know.
He tzaddik, you can only assume that.
Yes, so he definitely knew he was a tzaddik. Okay, we're not going to fool ourselves that he didn't think but he didn't know. You have to understand, as a person becomes more righteous, it's not that he becomes oblivious. Oh, I don't know that if I'm a rasha or tzaddik. It's that he doesn't know if God's now going to judge him on a different level. You have to understand, God looks at the tzaddikim and looks at the kechut ha'se'ara, that the thickness of a hair with them, different. You're right. Of course he knows he's righteous. He knows he's doing what's right. But he's saying, maybe in the eyes of God, he expects from me a much higher level. It's more fine. And you're right, I am doing it right. But maybe in the eyes of God, he's going to say to me, My son, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, I expected from you 1,000 times more. You are the greatest Ner of Israel. And then when the students are telling to him, you're the candle, the light, the hammer, the pillar, it's only furthering his concern that, oh my God, I have two paths in front of me and I don't know which one I'm going to go. That way, of course he knows he's righteous, but he doesn't know how he's going to be judged on it. But we answered that this was all done, not the actual day, but a couple of days before, a few weeks before, when he was on his deathbed. But the actual day themselves, people will know. Just as a side note, I did a few things with the Chevra Kadisha, and I've worked even with people in hospice. I did it for a short time because I'm not that big type of guy when it comes to hospitals, these type of things. Never was my thing, but I did it a couple of times just to get the hesed, to learn, to see it. And there was one guy that I served. He was on his deathbed, and he knew already he was stage 4. It was very difficult. And I remember when he called me the day he was dying, and like he kind of told me like he doesn't know what's going to be, and he was worried about sins he did when it was the first time that like I kind of got scared. Someone called me, and he ended up dying that day. Where he was like worried. He's like I want to make repentance. I told him you have to make teshuvah. You got to do what's right. But it was a scare.
He told you he knew.
He told me he knew. He's like he felt that it was coming out. This happened one time. It happened the second time with an uncle I had, who the day that he died, that they wasn't the day he died. The day they put him under a ventilator. Right before they did, and he was already in the hospital and was very weak. He had called me, and he was already in his late 70s, and he had told me, it's like I feel so young, mentally, but not physically, because I feel like I'm 7-10 years old, still a kid. He was calling. It was my uncle. He was telling me, it's like I still feel so young, and I'm still vigorous. And he goes, but I'm physically not, but mentally I'm not an old man. I still feel young, and these type of things only furthered in my life that you should do the things that you want to do with your life. You should not squander them for other people, situations, or things. Obviously, we have things that are important and not important, but a person should put the things that are important that he wants to do in life and put them and do them now and prioritize them. If you have the desire, do it, because time flies. And seeing that, it had an effect. Okay, so it says here it's talking about the specific day. במה שאין כן מעשה תלמידי רבי יוחנן בן זכאי שבא לברכו לו היה ביום זה היה זה מיתתו ממש. It wasn't the actual day, אלא קצת לפני כן, it was before. או אפשר ליישב, we could say something else, שבאמת ידע רבי יוחנן היכן הוא הולך. Really, רבי יוחנן knew he's a righteous person. ומחמת ענוותו עמל לתלמידיו, כן, he told them from his humbleness, he told his students כדי ללמדם מידת הענווה, to teach his students to be humble, that even at his level he wasn't arrogant, that he was guaranteed a red carpet in the next world, even though he was getting a red carpet. And also to wake them up, that if they see their rabbi feels this way, they're going to think to themselves, oh my God, if my rabbi, who's doing everything right, even in my eyes and everyone's eyes, he feels this way, what are they going to think about me? In this book, it says, Larav Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac Meka'amarna שיחותו יגן עלינו, כתב דברים נפלאים שבשעת פטירתו של הבעל שם טוב הקדוש, when the Baal Shem Tov died, התפלל בזה הלשון, he prayed in these words, Elohai ריבון כל העלמים, my God, the master of the worlds, אל תביאני רגל גאווה, don't bring me a leg of arrogance. וכמו כן, כשיצאה נשמתו של האריזל, also when the Arizal died, התפלל בלשון Spania, when the Arizal died, he spoke in Spanish, Shomrenu mide ga'ava, to get me away from arrogance. Interesting, he says here he said it in Spain. Okay, in Spanish, or Latino. לפי דברי המדרש המובא ברבנו בכי המובא היטב, למה התפללו האריזל והבעל שם טוב זכותו יגן עלינו בשעת פטירתם שלא התקשט בגאווה? So why did they pray on the day of their deathbed, the Baal Shem Tov and the Arizal, for being arrogant? Why? Because on the day that they died, they were shown all the reward, so they prayed not to be arrogant from what they saw. because that's only for the next world. People don't see it in this world. So they prayed not to be arrogant, because they were being shown on the last day on earth what they're getting. They felt once they see from all their hard work and self-sacrifice what they're going to get, then they might get arrogant. Therefore they prayed, don't make me arrogant. Was Yaakov Avinu buried in Egypt before he was buried in Israel? Let's take a look what it says here. But Mishnah, in Nazir, it's brought down, and also in Ahalot, Tenan, hamefane met mimakom lemakom. A person who moves a dead body from one place to another place, notel hamet yachad im shalosh etzbaot min ha'afar asher hamet mutal alav. They move the body with 3 finger breadths of dirt from where the met is currently located. There's some notes on here, so we'll get to the notes in a minute. Oba Gemara Nazir Daf Samech Amud Aleph says, Lamdu din ze mi Yaakov Avinu. They learned this law from Yaakov Avinu about moving bodies. Shamar le Yosef un Satanim Mitzrayim, that he told Joseph that when you take me out of Egypt, the Hainu Shamar lo me'afar shel Mitzrayim told imi, take from the afar of the dirt of Egypt with me. That we see from this Gemara that it probably was that he was buried in Egypt first and then removed. And then later on they took him out of Egypt. Now it's well known, the Torah tells us that they mummified him, and that there was a process of like 40 days, and then there was a process of bringing him to Israel out of Egypt that also took time, 7 days, 10 days, yeah.
But so let me ask you, I mean, was that the mummification process, right? That was something that the Egyptians did, right? So I mean, I'm just questioning, Yaakov saying, hey, please don't bury me here, bury me where my fathers were buried, so on and so forth. I'm assuming his father, the patriarch, they were not mummified.
They were not mummified.
Right? So, I mean, and he's saying it is a known fact that he was. So
the Torah tells us very outwardly that he did.
So that was okay? Was it acceptable?
It seems that first it was before the Torah was given. So let's put that out there. That the Torah wasn't given in those laws, there aren't those laws out there. But it's a form of preservation that seemingly it was permitted. It seemingly wasn't an issue. And we could also say that it could have been that they didn't have a choice. It could be that because of the status of who Yaakov Avinu was, Paro didn't let them take the body out unless they did mummify it. You have to understand, the mummification first, as a side note, it works. Let's not kid ourselves. They're taking out bodies that mummified from 2,000-3,000 years ago that are still preserved well, the skin, hair, nails, body, and so there is something to that. It's just to put it out there. So it's just interesting that you're right. We can look into that further, into the halacha, into the details. But again, it was before the Torah, so we could put that out there. Let's take a look. There's some notes he has here on the bottom. It's talking about if someone finds somebody dead, that he has to move him. Okay, זה לשון הגמרא נוטלן בעת תפוסתן, הכי דמת תפוסה, אמר רבי יהודה אמר קרא, ונשאתן ממצרים told אימי. פירש רש"י במסכת נזיר, דיבור המתחיל במצרים, וזה לשון מעפר מצרים told אימי, from the dirt of Egypt take with me, יעקב said. וכן פירש הרמב"ם בפירוש המשנה מסכת נזיר, וזה לשונו, והסכימו את זה, למה שנאמר ונשאתן ממצרים, הרי ידוע שמשם ייסעו. What do you mean it says why would he tell Yosef and take me out of Egypt? Well, where were you beforehand? Of course you were in Egypt. You didn't have to tell me and lift me out of Egypt. Why that specific mention? Told rather, he's saying take with me from Egypt, dirt of Egypt, when you go to bury Yaakov. בזה שהם הסכימו את זה, למה שאמר יעקב אבינו סתן ממצרים, אמר לו, טול אמי מעפר מצרים, מפני שיש בו חומר המת. take from the dirt, because that has pieces of the flesh in the dirt. And that's how the Bartanur explained. Chibro Hagaon. This is the next one. Okay. V'tamah hatosefet Yom Tov. The Tosfot Yom Tov. That's what Yom Tov Lipman Heller. He brings down in Masechet Nazir Sham Dibur Machil Tevusatam. Shelo Matzinu B'Shum Makom B'Torah She'Yaakov Avinu Ikbar Techad Mitzrayim. The Tosfot Yom Tov says we don't see anywhere that Yaakov Avinu was buried in Egypt. Why did you assume that he was buried in Egypt and you took dirt? Where that wasn't found. Therefore, he comes out. Bashem harambam dehadimud Yaakov Avinu eno ela asmachta be'alma ki ena tochna shenikbar mitzayakov b'mizayim. He comes out that doesn't actually say that he was buried in Egypt. Maybe they took afar with it, but we don't see anywhere that he was buried. There's a big note over here. Let's take a look. Chibro HaGaon Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman Heller Zechto Yegen Nolad beWolstein שבאשכנז in Germany בשנת ש"ל"ט לאביו הרב נתן הלוי זצ"ל עוד טרם הולדו ובא לעולם כבר מת אביו. When he was born and came to the world, his father passed away. He's talking about the Tosfot Yom Tov. ונתגדל על ברכי זקנו הגאון רבי משה הלוי Heller. He was raised by his grandfather. This rabbi is a very important rabbi. You'll see, I mean, all the rabbis are important, but this one is an important one you'll see in regards to what we've been learning about how to behave in shul in the morning session. I'll tell you about it. That his grandfather was the head rabbi and also the head of the Bet Din in the entire Ashkenaz Germany. He learned in the Yeshiva of the Geonim. HaMaharal Miprag Zatzal Rabbi Yaakov Ginsburg Mi Prudenberg Zatzal, Rabbi Ephraim Ish Lunchitz, Lunchitz or Livenchitz, Zatzal, Baal Kli, oh, that's the Baal Kli Yakar, Ve'odalot Ephraim, the Ab Din Kakadosh Prague. Biyoto ben Hai Shanim Nitmanad Lemot Rav Bekal Kadosh Prague. When he was 18, he became one of the rabbis in Prague. Ve'yasa Shmol the Gaon Gadol Umuvhak, and he came out that he was a very intelligent and smart rabbi. Ben Lamed Shanim Kvar Kibet Hibra Gadol Tosfot Yom Tov Al Shas B'Zra. By age 30, he finished his perush, his commentary on all of the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Bishnat Shin Pei Daled Nitkabel La'av Be'din Kakadosh Nikolsburg. That's when he went to the other city, became the Abedin. V'acharei Kichlot Shana Bishnat Shin Pei Hei Nitkabel La'av Be'din Kakadosh Vayena. Okay. Ubishnat Shin Pei Zayin Nifcha La'av Be'din Kakadosh Prague. He then became the Abedin in Prague. Ve'he'ira Ha'aretz Mikevod Torato B'sikato Harama. And many people got from his knowledge, his wisdom, his Torah. He was very intelligent. And he took his presidency, his position seriously, and he was strict in the way he wanted things to operate. Nobody, he didn't care for people to, kiss up to them in any way. And he had a certain zealousness to him. And because of this, he had many enemies in his life. They ran after him with no mercy. And many bad people went and gossiped and lied about him to the king and to the government. Ferdinand Hashani, until the king came, the second, in order to put him in chains of iron, in order to put him in the high court in Vienna. He was in a big danger. Then came the wealthy people of the city, and also some of the non-Jews which were very prominent in the city, and they knew that even the non-Jews, that he was a righteous person, and he had a good heart. They knew he was really innocent. And only from people that made up stories on him. And they went out to save him, and they were successful, that nothing happened to him. In the day of 28th of Av, Shin Pei Tet, he got out of prison after being in prison, and they saved him from being killed, and other judgments. They had to pay for him 12,000 gold shekalim, maybe coins, sakum atzum varav, a tremendous amount of money in gold. If they took from the entire Jews in Prague and Vienna, they couldn't get this money. כרב עבדים בכל מילות המלך, ולא מצא מנוח לכף רגליו עד שבחמת השם נתקבל בשנת שצ"ב לאב בית דין הקדוש נעמירוב בארץ פולין. He ended up going to Poland then, בשנת שצ"ה לאב בית דין הקדוש ולדימיר, משום נתקבל בשנת ת"ד לשבת על כיסא רבנות הקדוש קרקע המעתירה, למלאות מקום רבנו הבא צצ"ל ובא שם אל המנוחה והנחלה לתקן שם תקנות טובות ומועילות. Then he went from city to city. He had a difficulty, but he was always in a prominent position. והיה לראש רבני ארץ פולין, he was in the head of the Polish rabbis, והחזיקו כיחיד בדורו בצייתו לדבריו. נפטר בקרקאו ביום כ"ו אלול. He died on the 26th of Elul. ושם מנוחתו כבוד. חיבר עוד, he also wrote other things, מעדני מלך ודברי חמודות על הראש בכמה מסכתות, פלפולה חריפתה על הראש לסדר נזיקין, צורת הבית על בניין בית המקדש, מגילה איבה, סיפור צרות שעברו עליו וניסים שנעשו לו. He wrote a whole book on miracles that happened to him, מלבושי יום טוב על הלבוש וקדושי הלבנה, בעניין מיעוט הירח, תורת האשם על ספר תורת חטאת להרמה, עמל יום טוב על פירוש האבן עזרא על תורה וחמש מגילות, התפרסם בעיקר על ידי פירושו של המשנות תוספות יום טוב. So there was one interesting part that I wanted to get on this rabbi, that he was a rabbi that wrote a special prayer for people who don't talk in the tefillah. During the years of Tach Vetat, the 1648, 1649, when the Ukrainian Cossacks were murdering hundreds of thousands of Jews, he had prayed to try to find out what was the cause in the heavens, what ticked off God to the point that this was happening. And he came to the conclusion that it was because they were disrespecting the Beit Knesset and the Beit Midrash by talking during the Tefillah, because that's the time that people praise God, and because that's the time that you praise God, by during that time, if you're not praising God and you're talking to your friend and that's not important, then they didn't have enough merit. Of course, it's a tremendous catastrophe when people talk in shul, and it takes away from the sanctity, the awe, and it affects the tefillah for everybody. There's no doubt about that. But it also brings a tremendous amount of good merit by just staying silent in the shul. And because of that, it tipped the scale, and he came to the conclusion that that was the reason. And he wrote a special prayer that they say, Yehi Ratzon, when they opened the Sefer Torah, that he said that anyone who doesn't talk from Baruch She'amar until the end of Aleinu, he has a special beracha that he's going to be successful and protected from all evil. And I have no doubt that he didn't talk in shul, because he at the end was saved in his life after all the people tried to go against him. So people underestimate this issue. So it's just an interesting thing. Okay, and we see in this other book of the Moshav Zikanim, שכתבו להדיא שלא נקבר יעקב במצרים, שהקשה בשם רבנו ישעיה ז"ל, כיצד למדים שצריך ליטול מעפר הקבר מיעקב שאמרנו שדן מצרים, והלא יעקב לא היה קבור במצרים. So another rabbi, this other one says also, where do you see that he was buried in Egypt, Yaakov, that he had to move the dirt? ותרץ בשם רבנו חיים ז"ל, שלעולם לא היה יעקב קבור במצרים. He never was buried in Egypt. ומה שלמדים שיעקב שצריך ליטול מעפר הקבר, כך הוא פירושו. that what do we learn from Yaakov? That you have to take dirt from the place if a person's buried if they end up moving the body. And by the way, there is a process of moving the body. A lot of people have done it when they're buried outside of Israel or in a dangerous place and they want to move them to Israel.
Yeah.
It was done with the Heidah, with Rav Mordechai Eliyahu. Kachu Pirusho She'amar Yaakov leYosef, Al na tikbereni b'Mitzrayim, please don't bury me in Egypt, said Yaakov to Yosef, Lefi she'a al menat שתוציאני ותוליכני ושכבתי עם אבותיי, שאם אתה עושה כן, אז ונשאתני במצרים, כלומר אז יהיה מוכרח ליטול אמי מעפר מצרים, וזה יהיה לך תורך ויגיעה רבה לישא עפר ממצרים עד חברון, אבל אם תקחני עתה וקברתני בקבורתם בחברון, שוב לא תצטרך לקבור אותי במצרים, לישא עפר הקבר ממצרים עד חברון. So he's saying that if you're going to bury, he was saying if you're going to bury me in Egypt, then you're going to have to end up taking the dirt with the body back. So he says, take Yaakov, take him straight to the place. That way you don't have to have the extra difficulty of taking parts of the dirt with the body and to take it straight. That's what he brings down here. He has a note here. זה לשון התוספות יום טוב, אוקיי, ונשאתם במצרים, כאמר מעפר שמצרים לא נמצא בכתוב שנקבע מתכנן במצרים, ורבם כתב באסמכתא. אוקיי, ראה תולדות, ראה פרשת בראשית. אוקיי, זה לשון המושב זקנים. אמרינן בנזיר בפרק ב' דף סמכי עמוד א', בהלכה אחרונה מינן לתפיסת הקרב מהתורה. שנאמר, ונשאתני טול אמי מקרקע של מצרים, ותמה הרב רבי ישעיה וכי יעקב אבינו היה קבור במצרים דילה מיני תפיסת קבר מן התורה, כלומר שיקח ג' מצוות עפר תיכוח ותרץ משם רבנו חיים, כך הוא פירושו, לעולם לא היה יעקב קבור במצרים, ממה שלמד תפיסת הקבר ממנו, כך הוא יעקב היה עומד ליוסף אל נא תקברני, וכשתצאו ותלכו כל השבטים תלכו גם אותי, תהיו צריכים לקח עמי תפיסת הקבר. So he's saying here, this is actually a part of the connection later on when they took Yosef out of Egypt. Yosef was buried in a metal coffin that they ended up burying into the Nile River that Serach bat Asher ended up identifying for Moshe when Moshe couldn't find it. But the other siblings of Yosef, the other Shevatim, were buried in the ground. And when they left Egypt, they took them from the ground along with the dirt. So Yaakov was telling Yosef, I know that everyone's going to get buried back to Israel, including all the other Shevatim. He wasn't saying specifically him. He was saying, I know none of us want to be buried here. But take me from the beginning. Don't leave me in Egypt all these years. And then take me out with the dirt. That was the one request. Because I think it's well understood that Yosef was going to bury him for sure there. He knew about Mirat HaMachpelah. He knew about the position, and he knew about how many pairs had to be buried. And interestingly enough, my parents were in Egypt, in Damanhur, Egypt, where Rabbi Yaakov Abu Hatzera is buried. Wow. That's the Baal Da'abir Yaakov. He's buried there. My parents went there. He said that it's like a village. The kids run around. People have no shoes. It's very poor. It was very dangerous when they went. It was very dangerous for them. And my father is Lebanese, speaks Arabic. And my mother speaks Arabic. They read and write Arabic. You know, they're very well versed in the culture and in the language. And even for them, there was a difficulty going. But they went. They prayed at the kibbutz. My father told me it was very scary because they took away their passports when they went there. It was a whole thing, because people generally don't come there. If they come in, they know they're usually Jewish. Who's coming to Damanhur, Egypt? Nobody is coming. So why is Da'abir Yaakov? Da'abir Yaakov was buried in Morocco. Why did he get stuck in Egypt? And it's brought down. The story is, I don't have a source for the story, so I always tell you if I don't have a source, that the story was that really Yaakov Avinu was supposed to be buried in Egypt. In Egypt, the land of Mitzrayim had a claim. They said, you brought us the righteous Yaakov, and we had here a famine in the land. And when Yaakov came, we respected him. And then the Nile River rose, the water irrigated the land, and the land produced a crop. And instead of a 7-year famine, it was only a 2-year famine and ended midway. So the land had a claim to Yaakov Avinu and has a claim to God. I don't understand. I respected this righteous tzaddik, and instead of you letting him rest in my land, you took him out and you buried him in another land. Right. He was upset. The land is upset, and the land has feelings. We know the land has feelings because when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, when the Meraglim spoke bad about the land rejected them. And it rejected even the people of the generation. It says, we don't want them, we'll take their kids. The land has feelings. We know that. We know the Torah has feelings. The book of the scroll of Torah. And so the land ends up getting offended. And the story is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them, don't worry, we'll take Yaakov Avinu now, but later on we'll bring you another Yaakov. There will be a Gilgul, or a spark of the soul of Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov, Abu Hatorah, the Baal Abid Yaakov Midamanhur, and Be'ezrat Hashem, when he's going to get buried there, you'll be quelled and you'll be okay. And that's why when he was traveling to go to Israel, he ended up dying on the way in Damanhur and getting buried there. So it's an interesting story behind that. Okay, let's continue. V'tirutz domeh katav Hida. The Hida brings down also Besifro Petach Enaim in Masechet Nazir, for Masechet Nazir. Besifro Penei David in Ot Tet Beshem Harav Abraham Gershon Mekitov Giso Shel Rabbeinu Abal Shem Tov שיעקב ציווה שלא יקברו אותו בארץ מצרים כיוון שאם יקבור שם יצטרכו להעלותו להיקבר בארץ ישראל יחד עם העפר שכן הוא הדין. So he says that Yaakov was warning them not to bury him in Egypt so they don't have to carry out the soil. ולא רצה להיקבר בארץ ישראל עם העפר ארץ מצרים שהיא ארץ טמאה. And his claim specifically was, I don't want to be buried first in Egypt because I don't want any of the soil, the soil of the dirt of Egypt. I know that that the other tribes are going to end up being buried in Israel as they are. You know, when you go to Israel, you can pray by the kivarim of the shevatim. So he said, but I don't even want the eretz, the tameh eretz. There's another reason I remember bringing down that when it came to the kinim, the lice was all over the ground, and it had an effect in the ground, and that was one of the reasons also why Yaakov didn't want to be buried. I remember reading it somewhere else. So the other reason was he didn't want any of the dirt of Mitzrayim. He knew it was an impure land. Ulam beperush hacheskuni, in the French commentary, katav she'achen nikbar Yaakov b'techila b'Mitzrayim, that actually Yaakov was buried in Egypt first. Umefaresh bazeh pasuk v'shachavti, because it says v'shachavti, I slept. Bekever Mitzrayim un satan Mitzrayim, and you'll take me out. Told imi afar Mitzrayim b'kedebriya Gemara b'Masechet Nazir, like it says in the Gemara. The Cheskuni always has interpretations that's sometimes a little bit different than the other ones. And it's interesting to point out, how can a rabbi like the Cheskuni argue on some other older commentaries that we'll see? So Rabbi Yitzchak Breitowitz of Or Sameach has an interesting, very important point to bring down, that when it comes to commentary in regards to the story of Tanakh, as long as it fits within the guidelines of Orthodox Torah, other people can have interpretations that are sometimes different than the previous generation and can even argue on them, as long as it doesn't affect halakha pesuka, actual halakha, and it's within, like I told you, the Orthodox Torah guidelines of explanation. They can have different interpretations. It's okay. If you can fit it into the story, it's not halakha based, you can. And that's how generation after generation we had different people who interpreted Torah in different ways. And they sometimes argued on previous predecessors that were Rishonim, and sometimes that were even Tanaim. How could you argue on a Tanah? When it came to this, there was a little bit more freedom of expression when it came to interpretation, as long as it wasn't halakha based, because halakha follows more of a systematic way. Here it's interpretation of stories of Tanakh, and Rabbi Miller has mentioned in the past that there is a form of imagination, a window that is allowed when you're praying and when you're learning, that the Hachamim allows you to use your own imagination into it, to put it, to animate the picture, however you want to call it. So if that's the case, how did they do the Perush of Hiskuni is difficult. How did they do a Evel, that they sat Shiv'ah for Yaakov Avinu in Mitzrayim, Kimifurash Bakra, like it says in Bereshit Nun Dash Yud, הלא קיימה לן שאין דיני אבלות לפני קבורת המת וסתימת הגולל כדאיתא במסכת נזיר, כן פסק הרמב"ם. So it says that a person can only sit Shiv'ah or do the halachot of Shiv'ah once a body is buried. Interesting. אולם לדברי החזקוני שנקבר יעקב בתכלם מצרים חל עליהם חיוב אבלות. So if the Hezkuni is saying that he was buried, then they would have to have done Avelut in Egypt. אבל כן, עשה יוסף אבל 7 ימים במצרים, ורק אחר כך פיnuhu במצרים וידעו לארץ ישראל וקברו במערת המכפלה. So it seems from here that he's saying that Yosef did a Evel in Mitzrayim, which means they must have buried him in Mitzrayim. אמנם כל זה הוא שלא כדברי התוספות. מועד קטן דף כ' עמוד א', דיבור המתחיל מחל, שכתבו שהאבל 7 ימים שעשה יוסף ליעקב במצרים היה קודם שנקבר יעקב. So he says that there was an Evel in Mitzrayim of 7 days, and you can't have Avilut of mourning until the body is buried. If the body is not buried, the mourning doesn't start. So how could it say that there was an Evel, a mourning in Egypt of 7 days before you buried the body? It must have been that the body was buried. So what's going on here? וכן כתב רבנו בחיה בראשית נ' דרשות, לפי דבריהם עשה יוסף אבל על יעקב עוד לפני שנקבר. That Yosef did a mourning before he was actually buried. And then afterwards they took him to Israel. And never was he buried in Mitzrayim like the Hezkuni. So that's the kasha, the difficulty they have on it. That my father swore me, why did Yaakov and Yosef want to be buried in Israel? Specifically, he has a different discussion on those words. Avi hishpi'ani lemor, avelut beyom hapinui. He says he's mourning on the day that they're burying. The dat hacheskuni, according to the Hezun Shenikbar Yaakov Techal Mitzrayim, that it said, this French rabbi who said that he was buried first in Egypt, al korkach tzarich lomar she'asu avelut shenit beyom shehotziu mekivro. That they did 2 types of Shiva. One when they buried him in Egypt, and then a second Shiva when they took him back out and buried him in Israel. It says in Kaimalan B'Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh Da'at Siman Tav Gimel Seif Aleph Hamelaket Atzmot Aviv או של שאר קרובים שמתאבלים עליהם, מתאבל עליהם כל היום כולו בכל הדברים הנוהגים באבל. That when a person takes out the bones of his father or of other close family relatives, that a person has to mourn for them, mother, father, sister, sibling, of those, he has to mourn them on the entire day that they take him, that the body is taken out. It's another mourning. That's brought down the Shulchan Aruch. דברי בעניין אבלות ביום פינוי המת, כדאי להעתיק מעשה שהובא בשו"ת מהר"ם ברבי ברוך. והובא גם במורדכי במסכת מועד קטן הלכות אונן רמז תו קוף, וזה לשון שו"ת מהר"ם ברוך בן רבי ברוך. מעשה אירע באשפירה כשנפטר רבנו קולימוס הזקן בן רבי יצחק. There's a story when this rabbi Rabbi Kolimus הזקן passed away. הייתה העיר במצור, the entire city was under siege. ושמו אותו בארון בבית המקווה, and they put him inside of a coffin in the house of the mikveh. Umanu lo miyad shiv'ah, and right away they put 7, ushloshim and 30. Afal pisha hayta da'atan lifneto misham achar matzor. So they ended up burying him inside of the house of the mikveh, and they ended up counting 7 and then 30. And then even though they had their mind to take him out after the siege to go bury him properly, they ended up burying him in Magensa. They counted from the second, not from the first. Let's see if he has any notes on this. Let's take a look. Parashat Noach. So it seems that when they counted on this rabbi on the burial that they ended up only counting from the first time they buried him, the 7, and then the 30, and not again from when they buried him again. Just an interesting part that he brings down here. All right, I think that's it. We'll end this today, and tomorrow we'll continue. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.